All right, welcome everybody to the next episode of the LearnIt Podcast. I am so excited to have Director Camillo joining us today. We're in Niagara, the beautiful place. It's been my second time here, but Camillo, thank you so much for being here with us today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
All right, well, we're just going to get right into it like we always do. Straight to your childhood, Camillo. No roundabouts over there. So take us back to when you were a child, because I've always felt like our experiences growing up shape, where we end up in some shape or form. So take us back. How were you like as a kid, Camillo? What would your parents have said?
Oh, wow. Well, my parents probably would have called me a troublemaker. I got myself into a lot of trouble. I was very rambunctious, very curious as a child. Probably today, they probably might diagnose me as ADHD because I was always on the go. But I think I really enjoyed being outside. I liked being with people. And so, again, I think my parents would definitely describe me in that way. My parents were immigrants here from Italy. Wow. And so I think that really shaped who I was. Growing up in small town in Ontario in Milton, I think I realized that I was a little bit different than my neighbors and my friends whose parents were many generations from Canada. So I think that did shape me. I recognized the importance of family, the importance of community right away, even as a child.
And what about your teachers? What would they have said of you if I go speak to one of your teachers?
Oh, wow. My teachers would probably say that I never stopped talking, and they always had to tell me to stop talking because I was a very social child growing up. I got myself into trouble. And so, as I said, I think they would be surprised that I got into education.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And speaking of education, you've had a long career in the education industry, in Catholic education as well. Can you share with your audience how this journey came about? How did you even get into the world of education? How did you know that was something for you in the first place?
I probably didn't really consider education for a long time, even into adulthood. I went to school for commerce, for finance. I worked in finance in my early 20s and my mid 20s. I have a younger brother who's a lot younger. He's 12 years younger, and he was into sports. I was in my 20s and I was coaching a lot of his sports. And I realized I was working in a mutual fund company in the business world, and I was not very happy, but I was very excited about going home and going to coach my younger brother and his teammates. And one of the parents on the team at some point said, you should be a teacher because you're really good with kids. Yeah. And it was the first time it really sparked an idea and a thought that maybe I should, because I'm not getting the same sense of fulfillment in the business world. Yeah. And so that was kind of the start. And I explored teachers' colleges. I explored teaching. I started volunteering in schools. And right away, I realized that was a passion.
Yeah. And I find that story is always so interesting because a lot of the times when I've spoken to folks, it's like we fall into education by mistake. It's not something that's always planned out. That's like, I know I want to go to teachers college and it's exactly what I want to do. But it's like, I taught something and I ended up loving it. And, since then I didn't look back because it's a feeling you don't know how to feel unless you do it, right? So it's very interesting to see that you just got right in, by mistake, if I may, and never looked back from there. So
that's very, very true. And it's funny, I visit schools and I meet with teachers, and occasionally I love talking to people and finding out their origin stories. How did they get to where they are? And many times you hear from teachers where they say, I've always wanted this. You have, young females who said, I was a little girl growing up and I was always the teacher in our friend group. Yeah. And for some, they know it, from day one. For me, that wasn't the case.
Yeah, well, I could resonate with that completely. And today you're a leader in your own space, in your own industry here. Can you share a couple of pivotal moments in your career that you feel have really shaped you as a leader?
One that comes to mind, it was my very first appointment as a vice principal. I worked in the Halton Catholic District School Board. And so I was at St. Gabriel in Burlington. And the very first week in the job, in a small little office, my principal at the time, her name is Anna, she came into my office and she right away made it clear that leadership was a joint venture. She did not in any way make me feel like I was second in command. I was the vice principal. I wasn't, as important as she was. She made it clear that leadership is not about one person. It's a joint venture, and that we were going to do this together. She described oftentimes to the staff, to the parent community, that we were co-principals, which I really found, I'd never heard that term before. And it really changed my thinking. I think growing up, I always had this vision of leader being,
It's one person.
a superhero.
Yeah.
I'm gonna fix everything. I'm gonna make it all right myself. And she very quickly dispelled that notion, saying, no, leadership is not about singularity. It's about together, collaboration, finding the right team, putting the right team together, and then trusting the people to do the right things.
Yeah, and I find that it's often those type of leaders that tend to have, stronger teams as well, because they form a relationship where it's, to your point, everyone's equal. We're all leaders in our own sort of communities, in our own sort of respective positions. So that's I love that sort of co-principal term that you just embodied.
Absolutely. It's funny. People often use the term, he was the smartest guy in the room, or I can tell you with my team, I'm never the smartest one in that room. I would say I'm the least smartest in that room, and I'm proud of that. I am comforted to know that my team are such experts, not just in their own specific areas, but they're experts in education in general.
Right.
And so I very gladly will defer to them many times, most of the times, because again, they are the experts.
Yeah.
And so my job is not to be the superhero. My job is to really let my team, give them the freedom to make the right decisions and then get out of their way.
Yeah, I love that, and that's beautifully said. And I want to dig a little bit deeper on when you became a vice principal. So for a lot of teachers that might be listening, they're thinking, do they want to even go that route? Mm-hmm. Or do they want to, because some of them, when how you fell in love with teaching. You might have not instinctively fell in love with administration, but you fell in love with teaching, and then your career progressed towards that. So for teachers right now that are thinking if they want to be a vice principal or go that route, what would you say to them? What were some things that you thought about when going on that journey of yours?
That's a great question. If you are thinking about leadership in education, and I think this bodes well for leadership in any field. Leadership is really about the people. You can really, you can learn the operational aspects of any leadership job.
Yeah.
In a high school, a vice principal is responsible for the on-calls, for the teachers that are going to be missing the day and making sure that those classes are filled. You're responsible for bus schedules. You're responsible for supervision schedules, and each has different programs.
Yeah.
That can be learned. The part of leadership that is essential is knowing that leadership is about people. Treating people. I know it's going to sound almost like cliche and simple, but treating people with compassion, with kindness, getting to know people, asking more questions than talking. I've really tried to embrace the idea over the last couple of years, and just this last August at our principals meeting, I shared with all of our principals the idea of let's be more curious. Walt Whitman, famous American poet, has a quote that says, "Be curious, not judgmental."
Yeah.
And I know that it's become popular because of Ted Lasso. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I love that quote.
I love it too.
But I've always been someone that has always talked about my leadership through curiosity.
Yeah.
We talked earlier, you and I, before we got ready for this, about origin stories. Learning someone, how did they get to where they are?
Yeah.
I'm always fascinated by getting to know, I see you today here. Yeah. How did you get here?
Yeah. I love that. I love that quote as well. Very, very, when I first heard that, I hadn't heard it. I learned it from Ted Lasso, to your point, right? That's how it got popular. But I say, that's a pretty good one because it's so simple, but it says so much about someone. And sometimes we're so busy and there's so much going on that we forget about the small things, the compassion, the kindness. So it might sound simple, but, in moments, I feel like it's helpful to just take some time to reflect. Like, have I been kind? Have I been compassionate, and all this.
Well, because judging someone can be very quick. We can make judgment calls. As adults, we're programmed to make quick judgment calls. You're driving, you see a car, you can make a judgment. You see a teenager in the car, you're going to make a judgment that they're new drivers. Maybe the kind of car they're driving, maybe it's a sportier car. You're going to assume that they're going to be reckless. It's important that we kind of slow down, especially in 2024, in the world that we live in, that can be very polarizing, where we can make easy judgments based on someone's social media, presence. I think it's more important than ever that we stop and ask more questions rather than just assume.
I love that. Absolutely. And, shifting gears into your role right now at the Niagara Catholic District School Board, what have been some of the most rewarding moments and some of the most challenging moments for you in your tenure here?
when I was first appointed in Niagara Catholic as director, it was July of 2020. Yeah. I think we all remember those days, and we remember what was happening in the world, and we were in the middle of a pandemic. And as I said, one of the way I lead is through getting to know people. Mm-hmm. Imagine trying to lead, getting to know people when the world is saying stay away from people.
Yeah.
Social distance. Don't go into our schools unless it's absolutely necessary. That was difficult. Coming into an organization with about 20,000 students and several thousand employees, several thousand parents. How do I get to know the people? Yeah. And, without really being beside them and having those conversations? That was difficult. What I found, though, was it did allow me to focus on the operational measures.
Right.
I couldn't get into schools as much as I wanted to. So therefore, I had to fight that disappointment, that urge to want to, and focus on keeping our kids safe, making sure that, all the health and safety measures were in place, making sure that, there was learning happening in our schools. And what I found was a year and a half, 2 years later, when all the restrictions started to get lifted, now I was somewhat of an expert in the operational matters. Now I could really lean into getting to know people at a much deeper level. In some ways, I find that it helped me
develop.
It helped me get a better understanding of the system because I'm new to Niagara Catholic, or I was at the time.
Yeah.
And so it really helped me get to know it in a slower way. Almost like, if this were a relationship, we really got to become friends before we became more intimate.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love that. And I feel like a lot of people, pandemic was a tough time, but I think it taught us resilience.
Yes.
And for me, what it showed is how quickly we can change if we have to, right? Because if I told someone before the pandemic at school then, or wherever it may be, I said, your life's going to change. You got to move online, everything in a week. People will be like, you're crazy. It's not possible, even if we had a lot of money. And then the pandemic hits and there's no option. And for me, what that inspires is it shows me that the possibility of change can be really quick. And it shows me the resilience that we have across our whole community. So in some ways, I feel like it was definitely a tough time, but it taught us some things as well.
If you work in education, you realize very quickly some of the most resilient people on earth are children.
Yeah.
As we get older, and I'm at a much older age than you are, you tend to get really set in your ways. It's hard to change your routines. Children, many times I talk to parents who are concerned, whether it was the pandemic or about a change this year, brand new school year. Yeah. They don't have their best friend in their class. And I always say, your child is trust me, they're much more resilient than we are.
Yeah.
And they will figure it out. And they do. I mean, going into schools in 2020 and 2021, kids were much more in line with those health and safety restrictions. They were wearing their masks. They were walking in, distance apart, much better than the adults were.
Yeah.
They learned quickly. Yes.
Yeah. And they don't have all the bad habits, right? So
Not yet.
Yeah, exactly. And, from what I've seen and read, one of the reasons why I also look up to you a lot is because you have a strong focus on mental health, which I think is an increasingly important topic for the kids as well, but also, across the board. Can you share a little bit about how that personal focus of yours has sort of come into the board and its own programs and leadership as well?
Again, I think if you talk to any parent today, I often say a parent is only as happy as their least happy child.
Wow. Okay.
And so, when you're a parent, if you have a child that's struggling, it affects you. It affects your work, your own health, your own mental health. And so, having two daughters myself who are adults now, who've gone through their own ups and downs of adolescence, of teenage, now young adulthood, I got a real close upfront understanding that, life is a lot more challenging for kids today than it was when I was a child and probably when you were in school. They're faced with many more distractions, many more challenges. School doesn't end for them at 3:00. The social aspect of school, which can be the most impactful, continues into the evening, throughout the night, through social media, through their phones. And so we really have tried to recognize that we need to, obviously all boards have invested a lot in mental health. Social workers, child and youth workers. We often talk about how can we do more upstream before it becomes crisis. How can we build resilience in our students? And so we've really tried to invest in programs, even at the earliest ages of children, to kind of recognize, almost having this self-awareness of, I'm having a bad day. What does that mean? Why am I sad? And so we've tried to invest, and we've hired more than what the ministry has funded us for. And again, our board of trustees, our parent communities are very appreciative of what we've done. It's still not enough. I can tell you that every single one of our principals in every one of our schools, if I said to them, could you use another social worker? Could you use another child and youth counselor or worker? They would say, give me 3 more, 4 more. So the work is not finished. I would say that it's a priority of ours, and it will probably, because we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think if you took Psych 101 of any kind, basics, you realize and you learn early that if your basic needs are not met, your higher needs will not. They're irrelevant. They're irrelevant. Well, obviously, we all need water. We all need food. We all need safety. But mental health is equally important. And if a child is not mentally well, they're not going to learn. They're not going to. They're not going to be ready to learn the Pythagorean theorem or their periodic table because
in the right space.
No, how could you? We're all adults. That when you're in a space in a day where you're not really having a great day, you're not going to work well. No, you could barely drive. What we've done in Niagara Catholic too, which I'm really proud of, is we've tied mental health with faith, and so we have a system chaplain and we have chaplaincy leaders in all of our schools. Beautiful. And in fact, we've actually presented provincially how we've tied, for us in our Christian Catholic faith, how mental health and faith development are, really tied. And so we've tried to build on that as well to make sure that our kids know that, with a strong faith, that will help you build your mental health as well.
Yeah, no, that's very beautifully said. And it's nice to see that those two worlds, because, I feel like faith is something that also helps people, myself, adults, students, whoever it may be, but that faith, that connection, that sort of spiritual, or something, over there can help you feel a bit more at ease in your own ways.
Absolutely. Now, we are a Catholic board. And so obviously, our faith is the Catholic faith. But our high schools have multi-faiths. And again, we support and we not just support and acknowledge, we want to celebrate that faith is an important part of any human being's existence. As you said. It kind of it makes someone realize that there's more than beyond the physical of this earth.
Absolutely, I love that, and I feel like as kids get older as well, they start to see it more and more. Absolutely. As kids, maybe don't see it, but as if it's in your school, your teachers, your mentors are sort of embodying it in the way that they carry themselves, I think it can have a huge impact on the kids.
Absolutely.
And beyond mental health, when we look at boards, let's say across even Canada, and you've been at multiple boards as well. I'm curious to know your thoughts on what do you think right now, 2024, some of the biggest challenges or blockers are that are, preventing us from maybe progressing? And maybe if you had a magic wand, how would you solve for them?
We talked about mental health, and I still believe, and I know that the Ontario government just recently passed the new legislation around cell phone bans in schools, and I think it's a great first step, and I think it's an important step. And even though many schools probably had very similar practices already, I do think cell phones, social media is one of the biggest challenges to schools today. Because as I said before, it does not, social media today is a constant weight on children's minds. And it's the equivalent of, trying to learn math and someone's asked you to hold a 20-pound brick while you're learning it. At first, you might be able to do it the first few minutes, but eventually you're going to realize all you're going to concentrate is carrying that weight. And social media has become that weight for our children. I don't know if I have an easy answer because we can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. We cannot remove social media. We try to restrict it. We try to minimize it. This is where we really need to work better with our parents because we need to work together.
It has to come from them too, right?
Correct.
Two-way street.
To do anything of significance, of social significance, we really need that partnership with parents, which we have a great partnership, but it has to come from both because, it's hard. It's hard for parents because cell phones provide a lot of other very positive for parents. Again, I can speak as a father. I love knowing that I can, even though my daughters are 21 and 25, but it gives me
Your
comfort.
dad at the end of the day, right? Yeah.
It gives me comfort to know that I can pick up the phone and either text or call and get them instantly to find out if they're okay.
Yeah.
There's power in that. My parents couldn't say that when I was their age.
Yeah.
They had to wait till I got home. And so that's why I say it's challenging, because there's a lot of real good and positives that cell phones and even social media have. And so how do we
balance that out?
Use the positives, but not, and somehow mitigate the negatives.
Yeah. And I've spoken to some teachers, and it's funny because they say, today I'm competing with TikTok because my class has to be as interesting as TikTok or Instagram. And I say, well, that's a pretty high bar, because it's, at the end of the day, if you're learning math, you're learning science, it's not something the kids are going to be so excited by every morning, right? But it's something they need to know to build their foundation. So it's like if you're competing, or, however you want to coin it, but really in the kid's mind, they would rather be someplace else. And so when I think back to my school, and I've been to a couple of schools here, I can see those minor differences. And you're right, like it's a combined effort between the school, the teachers themselves, and sort of how they, run their classroom and etiquette over there, and the parents to embody those values in their kids.
The greatest, again, we have a lot of fantastic teachers. When I go into classrooms, I find that the teachers that somehow balance that, again, I want to be careful. We're not there to entertain children.
Yeah.
But students today, children today, they're used to being entertained. Like TikTok is really entertainment, and it's quick bursts of entertainment. Let's be honest.
Short bursts,
it's like a 6-second video.
Yeah.
Their attention spans are used to consuming even entertainment in small little doses. So how do we, as teachers, how can we compete with that?
Yeah.
When you have a 30-minute lesson on
Pythagoras theorem.
Correct. So the challenge for teachers is how can you somehow, again, not to entertain them, but how can you, integrate a more of a shared experience.
Yeah.
Rather than be, we talk about the sage on the stage, like you're speaking to children and they're going to just absorb it, or they're going to take notes. Have them in, we call flip the classroom, where the students themselves are teaching their own classmates, learn about a subject, and then teach it.
Yeah.
And there's no better way to learn something than by teaching.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so it's fine. I think we are in the, transition in education.
Yeah.
We might look back 25 years from now as this was a time when we moved, the generations changed. We went from teachers who were, kind of moved out of the internet, kind of generation and then now we have our newest, our upcoming teachers, this is all they've known.
Yeah.
So they may have better ways to connect with kids than we can even imagine right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of technology, I'd love to get your thoughts and perspectives on AI. And the reason I ask is, you probably heard that a million times, but everyone's thinking about it. And I feel like education is changing now quickly. There's a lot of positive improvements as well, but I always like to hear the thoughts from your or the board's perspective. Like, how do you think of AI and education, and do those worlds combine for you?
They have to. I mean, the knee-jerk reaction, I can tell you, in education at first, AI is, oh, great, ChatGPT, kids are going to have, the computer write their essay out for them. Yeah. So what are we really teaching? How can we really assess
kids
and their understanding of a topic?
Mm-hmm.
The way, and so I understand that that's the knee-jerk, and that, again, anything in life, if it's abused, it's going to be a negative. If you use it for the right purposes, it can be truly glorious. It can be, eye-opening. I look at it as, GPS and in our cars. Imagine if we said now, hey kids, we want you to learn the streets on your own. Stop using GPS. We would never do that.
Right.
It would be inefficient.
Absurd, yeah.
It would be inefficient. Or we'd say, I've gotten so used to now my backup camera. Yeah. I find it hard sometimes when I do get in a car that doesn't have it, turning my back and doing the old school backing up and parking.
Yeah.
So again, it's a general way of looking at it. But what I tell my team and try and tell our principals and our principals into our staff is, let's look at AI like that. Rather than, oh my gosh, this is going to disrupt education completely. How can we use it in a way that will help us?
Yeah.
Because what GPS has done for drivers is it's made us more efficient in getting places. We would never say, let's not do that because we want you to learn the streets.
Yeah.
For what purpose?
The value, right?
Yeah. we have to rethink, what is education for?
Yeah.
You know, we when you think of the access to information that human beings have today, you know, at your fingertips, you have really every historical fact you could ever want in an instant. So if you are teaching grade 10 history and you are assessing students on their ability to pull up a date, a World War II date or fact or reason for one of the reasons why World War II began, is that really necessary anymore?
Yeah.
Is it as necessary as learning how to back up by looking over your shoulder?
Right. Yeah.
Why would we continue to assess that and teach that and evaluate that? Rather, let's use now AI in different ways to have our children learn in a more exponential way.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with you, and I completely agree that I think it's our responsibility as educators to think about how we want to use the technology as a way that benefits the kids. To your point, when the calculator probably came out, I wasn't born then, but I would assume the math teachers were freaking out, right?
Absolutely.
Now the kids,
I do remember the time when they would say, "Oh, you can't use your calculator for this one."
Yeah.
For what purpose? Now, again, I understand there is some value in knowing your math facts in your head. Of course, I'm not suggesting at all that we throw out all basic facts and not teach kids how to understand basic facts. I'm saying it's not a either or proposition.
Right. Yeah.
It's an and proposition. Let's do both.
Yeah. No, I love that. Absolutely. And shifting gears into your role today as well. The way that I see it, you have different forces and stakeholders sort of maybe coming to you. You got your parents, you got your teachers, you got your principals, you got your board trustees, the ministry. There's so many different sort of facets of being a director. Can you share a little bit about how do you keep everyone happy? What's the secret behind that?
Well, what allows me to try and keep a somewhat of a sane perspective on this is recognizing that all those stakeholders that you mentioned, parents, teachers, principals, ministry, for Catholic board, our parish priests, we all have the same goal. We want what's best for kids.
Yeah.
No one would say differently.
Yeah.
Like if you ask a parent, what do you want for your child? They want the best. They want the best for them. What does that mean? They want them to be, fully prepared academically, emotionally, socially, spiritually in a Catholic board. So if I think of the goal being the destination, I see it as we all know where we want to go.
Right. Yeah.
If we had 6 friends and we decided we want to go on a vacation, if we all decided we want to go to Miami, that's great. We all agree that's where we want to go.
That's the goal for everyone.
We might all disagree on how we get there. And so what I find comfort is knowing that we all want the same destination. Now it's just a matter of realizing how do we get there?
Yeah.
And so yes, parents might see we need to go one way to get there, and the ministry might tell us it's a different way to get there. Yeah. Our teachers might want a different way to get there, but at least we know we all want to get to that same destination.
Yeah. And so brings people together, right?
Correct.
Sort of that.
So for me in the role of director is how can we, rather than again getting into like conflict, because this world unfortunately today loves conflict, how can we find a way to explain, getting back to curiosity, getting to know someone, ask more questions. Why do you think that's the best way?
Yeah.
Many times in my role, not many, let me rephrase that. Sometimes in my role, I will get calls from parents come to my office, and I always take them. Yeah. And I just love to listen. I want to know, why do you think this? Why do you think we're doing this poorly? Why I made a mistake here? And sometimes they have some very good points. Again, and I will concede it. Yeah, we can do better. So I think the way that we can try and find cohesion is really by listening to each other. Because again, I don't think there's one magic formula to get to that destination. I think that we have to recognize that we all have a part to play. We all have value. I think parents should have a strong voice in education. Yeah. I think teachers must have a strong voice, obviously. I think principals have a part to play, our parish priests, but not one stronger than the other. It's trying to find that balance.
Yeah, no, and I think I like the way that you put it, is that we're all trying to get to the same place. right? So whether we agree or disagree, we know that we need to get there. Let's just, be curious, not judgmental, and figure out a way that we can all work together to get there.
It would be harder.
It's like you're an orchestrator of all that, right?
Correct. Imagine how hard it would be if we all had a different goal.
Yeah.
Again, and sometimes we're lucky in education that we can all agree on that ultimate goal.
Yeah.
Because in other industries, they don't.
True. Very true.
Like if you're in the finance world, you might think, oh no, we need, stronger, taxes. We need higher taxes. We need more tariffs. We need, lower interest rates. There's a lot of different competing goals. In education, we have the same goal, all of us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's also what brings the teachers together, is that everyone, whatever stakeholder you look at, it's all for the kids at the end of the day. Right? That's why we do what we do.
Correct.
Our future generation. And if I take us forward 5-10 years from now, what do you hope your legacy would be in education?
I cringe when I hear my legacy. I don't believe in my legacy. I'm one.
What do you want people to remember you for?
I'd rather, again, for me, I try and I know it's going to sound very cliche, but again, I want every one of our students in our buildings to feel like they are seen, that they belong, that they don't feel like they're different. And I think the only way they can get there is if our teachers feel that way too. If our staff, not teachers only, all of our staff.
Yeah.
My father was a custodian in a school.
Wow.
And so it was in my school as well. And so, again, looking back, I'm ashamed a little bit to say that I was a little embarrassed that my father was the custodian in the school. And so what it did do is it taught me the value of how important everybody is in a building, in education.
Right.
Whether you're a secretary, whether you're an educational assistant, whether you're a teacher, the principal, the superintendent, the director, we all have a part to play. So getting back to what do I want, in 5 years, 10 years, I want our students who graduate leaving us saying, I knew that I felt safe in that building. I felt heard in that building. I grew in that building.
Yeah.
But that can only happen if the staff feel the same way.
Right.
You can only model.
Because they're the ones to embody that.
Correct.
Right? And the kids.
You can only model what you see, right?
Yeah.
And so how do staff feel that way? If their principals, the leaders in their buildings, treat them that same way.
Yeah.
And they treat them equally. Whether you're a teacher, whether you're an educational assistant, whether you're a parent volunteer in the building. And how does the principal feel that way is if we treat them that way as well. So it's all basically, it's almost like, what's the term? Pay it forward. So that, again, if I want, not that I want, but if there were to be a legacy, is I want anybody that comes from Niagara Catholic to feel like that place felt like almost like a second home, that I felt like I was loved there.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I feel like, when I was lucky because I love my school and I love, and I don't go back that often because it was back home in Uganda. But every time I go to the school, there's a bit of a feeling that, just like I remember this so well. And then to go and see your teachers there, it's a different feeling. And I think as kids, when we're going through school, we don't realize that. Yeah, we're just, sort of going through assignments, going through homework, going through exams. Like, I can't wait to get out of here. I can't wait to, go to university and all these sort of things as kids you think about. And then, now I'm in my mid-20s and I go back to my school and I said, you know what? I wouldn't have had it any other way. Absolutely. I love seeing the teachers. And to see the happiness on the other side, your teachers being so proud of you, of where you've come, I think is just such a special relationship that matures over time. And it's like, they always remember you. Like my teachers probably teach hundreds of kids after me, but they'll always remember. And I think that's such a special relationship in the student and the teacher.
A lot of organizations, corporate, business will often use the term family. We're like family here. And again, I don't want to minimize that. They probably, try to aspire to that. I would argue that the only, outside of true family, the only other organization that comes as close to that as possible is a school.
I would agree. Yeah.
Where you feel like, in fact, again, in my early days of teaching, I was teaching little ones, grade 3.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times, and you ask any primary teacher, especially this question, how many times the little ones by accident call you mom or dad? Oh, because there's so much. It's intuitive that they think the person here is like, they care for me. And so often they would say, Dad, Mr. Cipriano. Yeah. And again, it was funny, but it also, I think it's a reflection of how close we are to family.
Yeah.
And you said about going back to your school. If you've ever had a chance to go back, if you don't still own your childhood home.
Yeah.
I grew up in Milton, and every time I go to Milton, I always make a detour to my childhood home.
Yeah.
And there's something about seeing the house, even though
different.
it's probably been changed over ownership maybe 3-4 times since that time. It gives you that nostalgic feel of, I was loved there. I felt safe there.
Yeah.
And that's our goal.
All the memories start flashing back. You're like, I remember being naughty or being
You got it. And that's our goal for education, is like you said, I want to hear all of our kids say those. You go back and you got that warm feeling seeing the school.
Yeah.
And again, in Niagara Catholic, well before my time here, we're blessed that there's a real connection from our graduates. I shouldn't be amazed anymore, but I still am, how many of our staff are former graduates of our schools.
Wow.
I can tell you almost everywhere I go, I often hear, I went to school here. And some of our principals went to school there, were teachers at that school, and now are the principal at that school.
That's family, yeah.
That's family.
That's how you know.
That's generational family.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're going to shift gears into my favorite part, which is the rapid fire round.
Okay.
So I'll shoot you a question. Keep your responses under 1 minute. I might add a couple more. Who knows, right? But we'll go through this, and it's an opportunity for our listeners to get to know you a bit more and also hear a little bit about your advice. Okay. So the first question is, what's your favorite book on leadership or education?
And again, for the listeners, you gave me this heads up, and I don't really have a favorite book on leadership, if I'm being honest. Okay. I've got many books. You see behind us, many books on leadership. I don't think I've ever read a leadership book from start to finish. I think it goes back to my childhood of a little bit of ADHD. I go in and out of books. I will read a few chapters, something that kind of strikes my fancy. I have many books that I've started. I have many books that I started in the middle and then finished. But for me, leadership, the most value I've ever received in reading on leadership is in biographies. I said it earlier, I love origin stories. I love to read biographies. So I've read a book about Ronald Reagan, former president of the United States, a book about Pierre Trudeau, one of our former prime ministers, JFK, Richard Branson. I love reading biographies about leaders. And rather than be leadership like where it's blatant, do 1, 2, 3. I want to read about the context of the history of how did they become the way they do and what led them to their decisions. Wow. That fascinates me more than, let's say, a leadership type book.
Yeah, well, I can completely understand it. I feel like those stories are a lot more interesting too, right? They're like, this person did this. I didn't know that, right? Because we just see them at the end of where they've reached, right?
So that when I really want to kind of dig into leadership, I look to find a biography about someone that I admire, and then I try and read about them.
Yeah, I love that. All right, next question here. What is one part of your daily routine that you cannot skip?
I wake up very early every morning, and I drink a lot of coffee. But my very first start in the morning is brew a cup of coffee, and I have to read the local papers for at least 30 to 45 minutes.
We're talking physical paper, old school?
I used to be physical. I've just recently kind of, I've stopped. I'm now online, but Globe and Mail, Toronto Star. I just want to kind of get a sense of what's happening in the world. CBC.com, CNN, just to try and kind of what's going on in the world right now, today, locally. I always check on my Toronto Maple Leafs as well to see if how they're doing. But I cannot, no matter where I am in the world, I do travel a lot. That's always my starting routine.
Wow. Well, you'd be surprised at how many people say the one thing they can't skip is their coffee.
Yes.
So it's like part of our blood now. In terms of, outside of the board and outside of your day job, if I may, what's your favorite thing to do?
I love to travel. I love to, and again, when I say travel, doesn't necessarily mean like an exotic, on a plane, although I love that. I love beaches and I love, learning different cultures. Yeah. I like road trips. I like to explore. And I think it kind of connects with my love for curiosity. Yeah. I think I really do believe that, for me, traveling is another extension of asking questions in a different way, in a different mode, right. Getting to know a community. I love to go to, like I said, drive 2 hours to some small town in Ontario, get a motel or something, and just to kind of fit the town.
Yeah. What's your favorite destination? If there's one last place you could travel, where would you go?
I go to the Bahamas a lot. It is, so it is a go-to place. I'm blessed because I have an older brother who we're very close. And he does live in the Bahamas half the year. So it's an easy place for me to go. Yeah. I love to golf. So there's good golf, good weather. And
there you go. Sounds like magic to me. Yes. And if it wasn't for being in education, what industry, I know you said you're in finance, but what industry do you think you'd be in today?
getting back to travel. I think I would want to be in the travel industry.
Okay.
Either, work at, some in hospitality, like on a hotel, some exotic place. I mean, if I was a better writer, maybe a travel blogger or vlogger, or just
go around the world.
Yes. I just love to travel, and I would. Again, you often hear kids, especially millennials today, they marry their passion with their career. In my generation, they often talked about follow your passion, but it was more like for sports. If you were like great at sports, which I wasn't.
Yeah.
But again, if I had to do it all over again, I'd probably try and find a career in that.
Travel. Yeah. Oh, I love that. All right, next question here. A role model that has inspired you a lot.
I said it earlier about my father. Again, for my father, who is still alive, and he was a custodian, he recognized the value of education. So if we're talking for me about, a role model that kind of inspired me in education and in leadership, like I'll never forget the day I told him that I became a teacher. I got a teaching job. For him, as a custodian in a building, for him, there was no greater honorable position than the teacher. Yeah. And so I probably made him most proud when I became a teacher. Wow. Again, being a principal was, he was proud about that. But I think if I look back, I actually think he was the most proud of me when I told him, hey, Dad, I'm a teacher. Yeah. And so obviously he understands now my role now is more, it's got his greater responsibility, but I'm still in education. So I would say that my father is.
I love that. And as a kid, what was your least favorite subject and your most favorite subject in school?
Okay. I loved math. I'm a numbers guy. I love doing, mental math. I love data. I love looking at charts. Because of sports, I love all that stuff. Yeah. Least favorite, I was never into music or the arts. I'm not an artsy kind of, Yeah. I wish I were. I don't have a very artistic kind of sense. Yeah. And so it's a little bit of, it was least favorite because I wasn't very good at it.
Yeah. Well, that's how it tends to be, right? Whatever you're really good at, you enjoy it more naturally as well. Okay, and then last question on the rapid fire. What's either the best piece of advice you've ever received or a piece of advice that you'd like to give to future educators?
Today I was in a school and I was talking to a brand new teacher. She just finished Teachers College, day 3. Oh, wow. And I said to her, and I'll say it, so this would be my advice to educators. Get to know the students. Again, get to know who they are. Not just what their academic needs are. That's important. That's great. But get to know who they are, their context. Getting back to the idea of being curious and not judgmental. Yeah. Like, don't judge us. And again, not that they are, but it's easy to judge if you're not asking questions. It's easy to judge that 7-year-old that comes in all disheveled, forgetting their lunch, forgetting their textbook, don't have a pencil. It's easy to make some assumptions about that student. Right. Get to know them. Get to know who they are, what brought them. And maybe you'll discover that some of those, what we maybe call deficiencies, are not by choice. They're not. It's because of their circumstances, because of who they are, and because of where they're, what's happening in their life. So get to know your students.
Yeah, and it's so important these days as well. Like, I think, to your point, kids are very resilient, but there's so much they might go through that they don't express out, right? So sometimes with kids, you need to probe. You need to invest the time in understanding them. So I think that's what forms a relationship. That's the bond right there.
And that's why it turns into family.
Yeah, there you go. All right, and the last question to close us off here, Camillo. 5 years from now, where do you see yourself? Where do you see Niagara Catholic? Tell us that.
I see myself, again, I think it'll be coming to the end of my career in education. So, where I see Niagara Catholic, again, I want Niagara Catholic to continue to be that, provincial leader. I want to make sure that, Niagara Catholic continues to be a place where every child, no matter what their pathway is, whether they are going to go to university one day, whether they're going to work in the trades industry, whether they're going to work straight out of high school into a place of work, I want to know that we prepared them the very best for that pathway, and that pathway has also been equally cherished and celebrated. Yeah. Like, I want to make sure that people that, like, certain pathways aren't seen as a more privileged pathway or more celebrated or more important pathway. Every pathway is important. And we need students, and we need children, and we need eventually adults in all those pathways. And so I hope in 5 years that we continue that. What we've done now is to make sure that all of our kids find their place in our schools and they find their pathway.
Okay, now that's a beautiful place. And the one new tradition, that's a bit of a spin now I'm going to give you, Camillo. I didn't tell you this before. A new tradition that we're starting on the LearnIt podcast is I'm going to give you this piece of paper and a pen.
Okay.
And you're going to write a question for the next guest that we bring on.
Okay.
So
Okay.
you don't have to say the question out loud.
Okay.
I'm going to get you to write it down. And then
wait.
the next guest is going to be surprised. This could be anything personal. It could be professional. Any question that you would want to ask the next guest. I'm going to leave this with you.
I like
and then
that.
we'll end
I
off
like
with
that
a-
tradition. Thank you.
All right.
Right now?
Yeah,
okay.
go on.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Pressure.
It is pressure. If you could go back 10 years ago, because often you ask questions about
Ahead.
If you can go back 10 years ago,
Yeah.
would you do something different? And what would that be?
Oh, that's a hard question. I'm excited for the next guest to see that one.
So I will continue writing that, but that's my question. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you everybody for tuning in today. Camillo, it's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you
Real
so
pleasure.
much for
Thank you for
taking your time. So many great insights, great nuggets. So hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll see you at the next one.